Hello, everyone. Today I will begin a series of reading from a diary. Today we're going to be reading a diary of a little girl in Old New York, published by Catherine Elizabeth Havens. And this diary was published in the year of 1920. A diary is written by a 10-year-old girl when she lived on 9th Street in 19th century New York. We're going to read some foreword. I think there are many New Yorkers who, like myself, have spent most of a long life in this delightful old town, that love to go back in memory to the quaint little city of their childhood, which has so completely disappeared in the great metropolitan community of today. Perhaps this little book, which is faithful records of events as seen by childhood eyes and recorded in childhood fashion, may give an hour or two of pleasure to old friends of the city, far and near. And although they may not any more see the tree-embowered streets of long ago, and the little 2-story brick houses with their dormer windows and slanting roofs that used to line both sides of the street, the author hopes that these pages may bring back some of the scenes they were familiar with and help to renew in spirit, at least, some of the old friendships and affections they enjoyed when the heart was young. And so we will read the first entry. Diary of a Little Girl in Old New York, 1849 to 1850. August 6th, 1849. I am 10 years old today, and I am going to begin to keep a diary. My sister says it is a good plan, and when I am old and in a remembering mood, I can take out my diary and read about what I did when I was a little girl. I can remember as far back as when I was only 4 years old, but I was too young then to keep a diary. But I will begin mine by telling you what I can recall of that far-away time. The first thing I remember is going with my sister in a sloop to visit my aunts, Mrs. Daring and Mrs. El-Hamadou, on Shelter Island. We had to sleep 2 nights on the sloop and had to wash in a tin basin, and the water felt greedy. These aunts live in a very old house. It was built in 1733 and is called the Manor House, and some of the floors and doors in it were in a house built in 1635 of wood brought from England. The next thing I remember is going with my nurse to the Vauxhall Gardens and riding in the merry-go-round. These gardens were in Lafayette Place, near our house, and there was a gate on the Lafayette Place side and another on the Bowery side. Back of our house was an alley that ran through to the Bowery, and there was a lively stable on the Bowery, and one time my brother, who was full of fun and mischief, got a pony from the stable and rode it right down into our kitchen and galloped it around the table and frightened our cook almost to death. Another time he jumped onto a new barrel of flour and went right in, boots and all. He was so mischievous that our nurse kept a suit of his old clothes done up in a bundle and threatened to put them on him and give him to the old clothes man when he came along. The beggar girls bother us dreadfully. They always have the same story to tell, that my father is dead and my mother is sick, and there's 5 small children of us, and nary a hoppo. The hoppo means money. They came down the steps to the kitchen door and rung the bell and asked for cold victuals, and sometimes they peeked through the window into the basement, which is my nursery. And one day my brother said to one of them, "My dear, I am very sorry, but our victuals are all hot now. But if you will call in about an hour, they will be cold." And she went away awfully angry. We moved from Lafayette Place to Brooklyn when I was 4 years old, but only lived there 1 year. My brother liked Brooklyn because he could go crabbing on the river, but I was afraid of the goats, which chased one of my friends one day. So we came back to New York, and my father bought a house in 9th Street. He bought it off a gentleman who lived next door to us, and who had but 1 lung, and he lived on raw turnips and sugar. Perhaps that is why he had only 1 lung. I don't know. I am still living in our 9th Street house. It is a beautiful house and has glass sliding doors with birds of paradise sitting on palm trees painted on them. And back of our dining room is a piazza and a grapevine, and we have lots of Isabella grapes every fall. It has a parlor in front and the library on the middle, and the dining room at the back. On the mantelpiece in the library is a very old clock that my father brought from France in one of his ships. It has a gilt head of Virgil on the top, and it is all gilt and stands under a big glass case. And sometimes I watch my father when he takes off the case to wind the clock, and he has to lift it up so high, and his hands tremble so, I'm afraid he will break it. Sometimes I think we shall never move again. I think it is delightful to move. I think it is so nice to shut my eyes at night and not know where anything will be in the morning, and to have to hunt for my brush and comb and my books and my Et Cateris. But my mother and my nurse do not feel that way at all. We know a lot of our neighbors who live on 9th Street. Down near Broadway lives Dr. DeWitt. He is a clergyman, and he is Dr. Knox and Dr. Vermiella and Dr. Chambers take turns in preaching in the 4 Dutch churches. On the corner of University Place lives Mr. James Brown, and above our church on the corner of 10th Street is Mr. William H. Aspinwall's house. And back of it he has a big picture gallery. On our block on 9th Street, beginning at University Place, on the upper side is Mr. Jasper Grosvenor and Mr. Aquira Stout and Mr. Cyrus Curtis and Mr. Henry Thompson and Mr. Cummings and Mr. Calvin W. Howe and Dr. Barrowy. On our side of 9th Street is Mr. Coddington and the Buckners, and on a corner across 5th Avenue is a big open lot with a high board fence. And next beyond that lives Mr. Quincy, and then Mr. George Phelps. Ever so many of the children of these neighbors come to our school. There's another school for girls on our street, kept by Miss Sedgwick. Mr. Guy Richards and his brother, Mr. Nathaniel Richards, live next door to each other in the very handsome big brick houses in Bleecker Street. They have white marble steps. They both go to the brick church. I forgot to say I have a little niece nearly as old as I am, and she lives in the country. Her mother is my sister, and her father is a clergyman, and I go there in the summer, and she comes here in the winter, and we have things together like whooping cough and scarlatina. Her name is Ellen, and she is very bright. She writes elegant compositions, but I beat her in arithmetic. I hate compositions unless they are on subjects I can look up in books. Beside my little niece, I have a dear cousin near my age. Her father died in New Orleans, and her mother then came to New York to live. She brought all her 6 children with her, and also the bones of 7 other little children of hers, who had died in their infancy. She brought them in a basket to put in the family vault on Long Island. I think spelling is very funny. I spelt infancy as INFANTSY, and they said it was wrong. But I don't see why, because if my 7 little cousins died when they were infants, they must have died in their infancy. But infancy makes it seem as if they hadn't really died. But we just made believe. I have 3 little sisters who died before I was born, and they are buried in the marble cemetery. And one day, Maggie took me to see their grave, and the cemetery has a high iron railing around it, and we had to open the gate and walk through the long grass. The oldest child was named Anna, and she was 7 years old, and she went with my oldest sister to Miss McLean's school, and she was taken sick in school, and my sister brought her home, and she died in 48 hours of scarlet fever. My aunt and my cousins came to New York 3 years ago. I was in my trundle bed one night and woke up and saw my mother putting on her hat and shawl, and I began to cry, but she told me to be a good girl and go to sleep. And the next day she would take me to see some little cousins. So the next day she took me, but first we went to Mrs. May's toy store, just below Prince Street on Broadway, to buy some presents for me to give to my 3 little girl cousins. They were living in a nice house in Bleecker Street near McDougall Street, and are named Anna Maria and Eliza Jane and Sarah Ann. I took Anna a basket made by some of the people at the blind asylum. It was made of cloves strung on wire in diamond shapes, and where the wires crossed there was a glass bead. She keeps her big copper pennies in it. Anna is my dearest friend. She and I are together in school, but now they have moved way up to 15th Street. But I walk up every morning to meet her, and we walk down to school together. Sometimes we get some of the big girls' books and carry them in our arms, with the titles on the outside, so the people will see them. I like to take Miss D's geometry. There is a Miss Lydia G. who goes to our school, and she is very sweet and beautiful. And one day our minister's son was walking to school with her and carrying her books. And I was just behind him and saw him give her a beautiful red rose. And I guess he was making love to her and perhaps asking her to marry him, for she blushed when she said goodbye. He is going to be a clergyman like his father. I hope they will be happy. Saturday I go to Anna's, and on Irvin's Place, between 14th and 15th Streets, there is a rope walk, and we like to watch the man walk back and forth making the rope. It is very interesting. Some Saturdays we go to see our grandmother, who lives with our aunt on Ebbington Square, and she sells Bella, her maid, out to buy some candy for us, and she tells us about what she did when she lived way downtown in Maiden Lane. She is our mother's mother. Anna's parents and my parents were married in the Maiden Lane house, and my father took my mother to his house at 100 Chambers Street to live with him. It was a handsome house, and before they were married, my father took out the wooden mantelpieces and put in white marble once to please my mother. My grandmother's mother lived in Fletcher Street, and she had a sister who lived on Wall Street, opposite the old Tontine coffee house. They loved each other very much and were both very sick and expected to die. But my great-grandmother got up off her sick bed and went down to see her sister, and she died there an hour before her sister died, and they were buried together in their brother Augustus Van Horn's vault in Trinity Churchyard. I love to hear my grandmother tell me about the old times. She says Mr. R., who married her aunt, was a Tory, which means he was for the English in the Revolutionary War. He was a printer and came from England, and Rivington Street was named for him. And I think I will stop for now. And if you guys are enjoying listening to this diary, feel free to come back later to hear more. Thank you for stopping by. Have a great day.